To kick off Data Transparency 2017, I'd like you all to join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Aneesh Chopra.
Thank you, Hudson. While we get our slides loaded, I want to just say at the outset how thankful I am for Hudson's leadership. We are absolutely in a moment of celebration with lots more work to do, but I do suggest that we all owe a great deal of thanks and gratitude for having organized us and brought us all together. So Hudson, thank you, sir. Well done. I do want to spend our time this morning lifting up to share a little bit of the context for why I'm so excited about this moment in time. The community that's gathered clearly has a practical agenda. We do need to make the spending data out of government more transparent. The notion that we'll have better standards for reporting information across the various agencies so that we have a consistent view as to what we can see and share with the American people, that's critical. But there are some lessons in it that I thought I might put my time and effort on this morning to show where this movement has implications beyond some of the broader, or narrower, I should say, transparency initiatives around the financial dimensions. I want to maybe begin with a little bit of my personal journey, and then we will drive into opportunities that I think all of us might benefit from or participate in. And it starts with my first role in government. I was in the Kaine administration. Governor Tim Kaine, who's now our senator from Virginia, had invited me to serve as Secretary of Technology. My background was mostly in healthcare and really the impact the internet would have on healthcare. And my general thesis before I entered government was that a new muscle mass was coming to life in our society, the muscle mass that is the internet, and it was going to have a revolutionary effect on our personal lives. We were already starting to see that in how it related to our friends, to our commercial partners and the like. But in the regulated sectors of the economy, it hadn't quite seen its fullest potential. And I'd kind of put my time and energy thinking what were some of the technical but largely non-technical barriers that we needed to overcome in order to realize the full potential of the internet in health, energy, education, financial services, you name it. When Governor Kaine asked me to serve, his emphasis was on the technology for a purpose, not just operationalizing data center modernization or some of the other back office functions we normally associate with IT. One of the priorities, as is the case with every level of government, is economic development, economic growth. And one of the biggest challenges that we'd seen, as we still see to this day, was a significant variability in the rates of economic growth across the Commonwealth. This you see is a map of the Commonwealth of Virginia, where we have many different flavors of an economy. We have some of the fastest growing tech-enabled entrepreneurial ecosystems up here in Northern Virginia, parts of Central and Southeastern Virginia. We have some of the most difficult rural communities that have seen flat to declining growth rates, population out-migration more so than in-migration, and challenges in growing per capita income. As I visited all parts of the Commonwealth early in my tenure, it was pretty clear that a new approach to economic development was both needed and beginning to be deployed. Economic developers throughout the state would say, you know, it's funny, Aneesh, I'm asked more frequently what the broadband coverage looks like in this community, more so than the traditional requests of utilities, do we have access to roads, what's the airport access like? And in fact, when you went to the Economic Development Office, the database that we'd built over many, many, many years emphasized these features when we were marketing properties. Look how close it is to the airport. Look at where it is to a highway exit. Here's what it looks like in terms of their power bills. And nowhere in the database was there a line item for broadband availability. And if so, at what level? It just wasn't even collected. So right when we came into office, the outgoing governor, Governor Mark Warner, had initiated two of the most significant economic development deals the Commonwealth had ever seen. Northrop Grumman and CGI, two government contractors, had made the judgment to employ collectively over 700 people in Southwest Virginia to provide technology and data center services, partially to support the state, but also to support all levels of government, increasingly the private sector. This idea of nearshoring instead of offshoring jobs overseas to nearshore those opportunities. And critical to the decision as to why Lebanon, Virginia was chosen was its physical proximity to a node on a high-speed broadband network that allowed these two technology companies to move information at a cheaper rate than data flows from here in Washington, D.C. out to Dulles, Virginia. So it led us down the path of our first desire for open data, data that was not actually held by government, but could be assembled by government and then made available. So this is not about we already had a data set, let's release it. This was, we see an opportunity, let's bring people together. And we had two elements to our broadband strategy. First was the commercial. We asked all of these economic developers. We went through the database, and it was something on the order of 4,000 unique properties that we had maintained. And we essentially crowdsourced the broadband availability section, and within a year, we had this database published, and you can see sort of on the map, the light blue areas are properties the government was marketing that did not have that kind of gigabit fiber broadband infrastructure, and those with the orange did. But we also went a step further, and this gets to this issue of regulation. We asked the cable companies and the telcos and the other operators that were providing broadband to rural communities, and frankly all parts of the Commonwealth, said, would you voluntarily share address-level coverage data so that we could make this information available and, frankly, get to a more serious data-driven judgment about where to allocate limited resources if we found gaps, so we could work with legislators and community developers to close those gaps. And what was remarkable was when the question became data transparency, and we had this discussion even when Hudson was describing kind of the challenges with getting OMB and others to kind of buy into this architecture, we realized that, wait a minute, we already have rough consensus around some of these things. Let's take the 80-20 rule and apply it. And so every, if you go to a website today, you could say, type in your home address and we'll tell you what your broadband availability is. Commercial marketers do this today. We simply asked all the broadband companies if they'd share that same database that they use for marketing with the state. And so my early experience with open data was largely around how it can be a tool to solve a very specific public problem. And that became the mantra that I took when I joined the Obama administration, whether it be finding ways to open up health information so that doctors, hospitals, insurance companies, and broader stakeholders could consume it to help people make better decisions, or whether it be as we promoted investments in the Recovery Act in areas like the smart grid so that we could encourage the release of openly available data in the energy sector so we could similarly find ways to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, encouraging folks to incorporate renewables or other resources into their own home and have that connection be made more easily. All of this is where I believe we've reached today when it comes to the opportunities with open data. We are starting to see a widespread capacity, not just in the United States, but increasingly around the world, digital infrastructure that enables the dissemination of information and the production and then eventual dissemination of information in a virtuous cycle that far exceeds the limitations of what we currently have today. And that is what gives us such hope and excitement. As you can tell from my ethnic background, I have family from India. I was born in Trenton, New Jersey, but my family was most interested when I became CTO that I joined President Obama on his trip to India. That was a port of pride for mom and dad. And what we had seen is a remarkable transformation, something President Obama described as a leapfrogging of infrastructure and capacity in the country. Back in 2010, India had a bold idea that it would make digital infrastructure as ubiquitous as what we today take for granted in our physical infrastructure. And it set about this goal that there are 250,000 villages in India, they called them panchayats. All of them would get gigabit broadband to their village center and would have essential communications and identity services that would be widely disseminated so that entrepreneurs and innovators could build on top. Today, 7 years later, India is home to the fastest digital platform to reach 1 billion users. It's not Facebook, it's not Twitter, it's Aadhaar, India's identity management platform. There, individuals can say, I want to claim my digital identity. And once I've claimed my digital identity, I want to be able to use it to connect and communicate and to transact with whomever I wish. It's common infrastructure. And you can see a bit of a screenshot of the Aadhaar portal. What's even more interesting about this is that it's become an open data set for the commercial sector. In the United States, so much of our financial services fraud and challenge is tied to the fact that the wrong people set up the wrong accounts. We have kind of an identity issue when you look at what remains of our fraud system. Well, we impose regulations on the banks. You got to know your customer. And we leave it up to them to figure out how they validate someone's identity. And if you're setting up an account online, it's even more complicated. In India, that's no longer a challenge. Now, any bank in the country can quickly leverage the open data set, which is access to my own identity, my digital identity, with my permission, of course. And it instantly allows for the creation of a bank account, the distribution of loan proceeds, even the scheduling of a doctor's appointment. A beggar in the streets of New Delhi has better digital access to medical centers for scheduling than most of us with fully covered insurance do, where we have doctors and hospitals still working their way through the digital systems at a fraction of the cost of what it takes to deliver services in the US. It is of my opinion that the work of this movement, the release of structured data, which encourages the reuse as much as the initial primary use, and the creation of a movement that says we're going to do this in all sectors and all dimensions, whether it be personal data access, government-held data, regulated data sets. The more we have, and we had some of the early comments on XBRL, for SEC regulation, all levers of government and quasi-governmental or voluntary industry initiatives all point in the direction of introducing this new capacity that has the potential to solve big problems. And the problem that I am hopeful we will focus on in this era is restoring faith and trust in government itself. A few years back, the Pew research community had surveyed Americans about open data. And what was fascinating about this is, while in the backdrop of clear decline in trust in government going back decades, there was a glimmer of hope. Of those who had some faith in government today, their faith in part was relying on the government's capacity to open up more and more of its data. So there is a perception, if those out there who want government to work, whether it be to fund tax cuts and promote economic growth one way, or to subsidize social services to promote economic growth and inclusive growth another way, regardless of your political outcomes and objectives, which we fiercely debate in the public arena, we want people to have faith that whatever choices we collectively make in our democracy, that we have faith that can execute. The path, in part, may be that we see more and more release of information as a pillar of restoring that trust. I think if the numbers were shared, roughly 69% of those who actually did have trust in government felt that the benefits of government sharing, there were actual benefits with the government sharing this information with the public. And even those who were distrustful of government, while not a majority, 43%, even if they were distrustful, felt like it's still good for the government to release information. So it's the application of open data that is beginning to give people such enthusiastic feedback loop to say we should do more of this. And by the way, as you get to more announcements later today about data sets that might be released about government spending patterns, my hope is that we'll see even more reuse of that information to activate our democracy, encourage people to communicate with their elected officials, and advocate for the policies that they feel have the greatest impact. In the city of Cincinnati, as an example, they are trying to look at one of the biggest public health challenges of our time, handling the opioid crisis, in part by disseminating information to the public and encouraging the healthcare delivery system, the public health system, to respond in a more data-driven way. I was impressed to see just how much information, near real-time information about where 911 calls are coming from, where the challenges are, how people could redeploy assets to focus on where the needs are the greatest. When we talk about the impact of open data, this notion of better allocation of limited resources will be a recurring theme, in my humble opinion. But it's not so much just a government-centric view of where I'm most bullish, although I see areas like this opioid portal being critical. It's also, I'm a card-carrying member of the Steve Case fan club, very critical to see the opportunities for economic growth. We are now entering, as Steve Case describes, the third wave of internet-fueled economic growth. Chapter 1 was really the era of AOL and infrastructure providers, basically getting you connected and building the pipes, the servers, the technical infrastructure. That's where a lot of the economic gains were achieved. Those companies were successful if they were part of a supply chain, and they tended to be located in certain pockets of the country. We then entered the second chapter of the internet, which was around the use of this infrastructure for digitally native services. And we saw the rise of Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc. But now we are squarely in this third wave, where we are going back to the rest of our economy, what some might argue the internet of everything, healthcare, energy, financial services, much of which in the regulated sectors as I started my conversation with you. And as Steve notes, it is in this chapter that we will see more pockets of economic opportunity in more communities. Where there's industry expertise in manufacturing or in automotive supply chains when it comes to Detroit or in parts of Ohio, or other, in Virginia, textile manufacturing or furniture in the southern parts. These are the communities that are going to see this next wave of economic growth. And what's exciting is how bipartisan the acknowledgement is of the role open data may play in economic growth. The the graphic underneath Steve's image is actually a Trump administration event that was celebrating this very specific opportunity. How do we commercialize all of this open data and to bring new products and services to life, right? Matt Lira, who I consider a hero in this movement, and spoke, I guess, yesterday or earlier this, maybe last week, about this notion of the kind of true nonpartisan movement that all of us are a part of. This is not about keeping score, what administration was better or worse, but rather how we all collectively are moving towards the same North Star, which is more data that's open in machine-readable form, hopefully more standardized and structured data for reuse. So what I'd love to do in the last half of my talk this morning is to just provide for you a window into where I hope we go next. Build upon what you're going to learn today, but more broadly. And that, to me, are the three levers we can pull to unleash this engine of economic growth. And I derive it from President Obama's Strategy for American Innovation, which had a roadmap for what we could do in the public and private sectors to spur economic growth, really for shared prosperity. The three areas that I'd like to emphasize for today's discussion. First, that we find ways formally and even informally, to deploy standards and promote competition. So the idea that we can get a common accounting framework for all the agencies, by the way, should be celebrated, right? Not an easy task. But it is not unique to just the challenge of making the financial data and government transparent. We have the same challenge in making utility information available to energy customers, health information available to patients, doctors, insurance companies, etc. Even school information or transcript information, your kids' performance data in a format that can be reused. All of this is possible today. We have the legal authority, we have the framework to make this thing happen. Number two, that we focus a little bit on the use of wholesale services in government beyond just the digital services. And the premise here is that we focus on ways we can take the raw data that's held by government and enable third parties to make use of it so we can make better decisions in our lives. And last but not least, that we financially reward that efficiency. So if we get productivity gains, there's an economic model that rewards everyone. I'm going to riff through these so that you stay on track, Hudson, but I'll hit you the highlights. Standards. While the federal government does not put its thumb on the scale by mandating standards, a specific standard absent industry adoption, we do see a new movement or an opportunity where the government can nudge, inspire, convene organizations that are not yet standardized to consider standards. To give you a small example, in the energy sector, when we deployed the smart grid, all of us now that have a smart grid, we have a meter at our home, a smart meter. It used to be that we wouldn't get our feedback loop on energy consumption until the bill came, representing 30 days of consumption, we write the bill. Now these devices collect information maybe every 5-10 minutes. So rather than getting my data feed once a month with a lag, imagine being able to subscribe to a real-time feed. Well, there had been no industry standards for how to get that smart meter data from the meter next to my home into my digital environment so that I can make smarter decisions. Within 90 days of a call to action, key utility leaders in California, led by Karen Austin at Pacific Gas and Electric, voluntarily agreed to work on rough consensus on a common standard that would allow, whether the app developer was talking to Pacific Gas and Electric or Southern California Edison or anyone else that voluntarily participated, they would be able to get the same data feed, regardless of the vendors and supply chain involved. So we had a common layer at the outset of this movement. And today, any resident in Northern California can connect their usage data to a third party. Medicare is going to lead by example by saying, look, we want to make sure that consumers can get access to their Medicare data in a consistent format so third-party applications can help you make smarter decisions. What Part D plan should I pick given how many drugs I've consumed in the last year? Which doctor should I pick given my conditions who are useful, who are capable of treating people like me better than others? Now we're going to see this ubiquitous deployment of standards throughout healthcare, energy, and if we're lucky, the education sector. The notion of envisioning government as a wholesaler is yet another opportunity. While I won't rehash the detailed play-by-play of healthcare.gov, the headline I want you to know is that healthcare.gov really never intended to be the one URL to rule them all. When we wrote the Affordable Care Act, we explicitly allowed for third parties, what we called web-based entities, to connect into the underlying healthcare.gov data systems and allow you to access and shop in a manner that you see fit. When Uber surveyed their drivers in 2013-14, they didn't have a problem shopping for insurance. They had a problem picking the plan that was right for them. 60% of them asked Uber for help, decision support really, for plans that would make them better off. The federal government probably couldn't offer that level of decision support because it's got that Switzerland nature of picking plans, but third-party application developers like Stride partnered with Uber so that if you gave them a little bit of information about your health status, they could personalize recommendations for you. And in a free market, we can compete on the best ways to shop for health insurance, as an example. But I also wanted to emphasize this notion of the bipartisan nature of rewarding these types of data-driven innovations. Here you see a report in healthcare I authored in December of 2011, inviting anybody with ideas on changing the way we pay for healthcare to reward value, and with the assumption underlying it that we could open up data in the hands of those who are going to help organize this new system so that they can be better at their job. And yet, just 2 weeks ago, or last week, the director of CMS issued a similar call to action saying, we want also your ideas, just as we had done in the Obama administration. Now, we may have emphasized a different set of interventions than perhaps the current administration will, but the notion that we were welcoming ideas from the public for new business models that might catalyze this activity is the exciting time of today. And so, Hudson, I end with this statement. The challenge of our time in open data, in my humble opinion, is to solve the biggest issue confronting not only this country but around the world, the ways we can better match talent with opportunity. Too many people in this country are left behind, and partially that's because of a lack of information transparency. Their underlying skills are not known to the recruiters that are trying to figure out who they should hire to fill a job. The job descriptions are not fully transparent to suggest exactly what skills that may not be in this industry but are relevant could apply in this particular application. And this notion of connecting talent and opportunity is the ultimate test for open data. If we strengthen the quality of the information signal from employers and job seekers and training programs, might we better optimize everyone's path through an economy and ensure that we all have the opportunity to live the American dream? Hudson, that's the challenge that I see in front of us. I wish you luck today, and I thank you for having me. Cheers.